All right, guys, we're back in this thing. Wasn't October fun? Just talking about women's bodies. Loved it. One of my listeners, who is 74 years old, a friend and someone who calls me Pastor, Terry Wicks, texted me, check this out. I want you to know how much I enjoyed the podcast I just listened to about women's bodies. Oh my gosh, that was great. The only thing missing was me. That's a good compliment as a podcaster when someone just wants to be there. I love hearing that. I was walking around the neighborhood and I was so into it. I was talking back to y'all. Yes, and that doesn't change when you get to be 74 years old. And let me tell you how that affected me, and on and on and on and on. I hope my neighbors weren't watching. LOL, but seriously, it was so good and got me motivated to walk after having pacemaker implanted last Thursday. How about that? This podcast caused someone to exercise. Hell yeah. I will take that one. So it's really funny, the context of last month's conversations. You got to understand that I was in such a sex negative environment. I was playing DC Talk. I don't want your sex for now. And I don't think my dad really liked that a whole lot. The song was about turning down sex. No matter what, unless you're married, but it had the word sex in it. Or maybe he didn't like the part where it says, I don't want your sex for now, because he just meant, well, is he talking about a couple hours? Maybe he just needs to take a nap first. Oh man, I've changed so much, and I've been thinking about this. So when this episode is released, I'll be in Israel. Yes, sir, for the first time. All right, so our church takes this trip yearly, and for regular folks like me and Priscilla, it's a bit too pricey. But out of the blue, we had a couple reach out and say, we'd like to pay your way if you want to go. So I get to see all the Bible stuff, where Jesus did stuff, where other stories happen. I'm excited. I've been thinking about it too. A gladness that I'm going now at this juncture of my faith, as opposed to my pre-deconstructed view of things. I'll give you a few reasons. How about that? If I would have gone to Israel in 2012 as opposed to 2022, in 2012, I'd be checking out the scenery, but secretly hoping it would be a big faith builder, like get some more of my questions answered, pressure cooker sort of thing. And now I get to go and just relish in the beauty and mystery of what Jesus did. I don't really totally even understand it, but I get to enjoy that. And I used to see faith as a type of currency that you need enough of to get into heaven. And now I know God accepts me when I have faith and when I do not. As a sheep, I can count on the good shepherd to come after me. In 2012, I'd be very bothered by all the nice, reverent, kind, and giving Jewish people who were on the way to hell. Obviously, a lot of Christians think being Jewish is a free ticket to heaven. You gotta love systematic theology. Salvation according to race, folks. That's a new one. In 2022, I'm not concerned about this. Like, I think we're all gonna be okay, so here's a practical one. In 2012, I was in the weeds of a tough time with depression that was kicked off by a buddy getting killed. Now I feel consistently healthy in that department. 2012, we'd have so much more to prepare for, leaving a 6, 4, 2, and 0-year-old. And now with a 16, 14, 12, and 10-year-old, we don't even care what they'll be doing. Well, partly because Grandma and Grandpa are coming to stay with them, and God bless my Iowan in-laws, their corn, the smell of pig manure, and boring roadways, all of it. I love them. In 2012, I saw myself behind the steering wheel of life, needing to figure out how to think, do, live, and feel. And now those things are a bit important, but bring no headache or stress, because I accept my role as 100% a recipient from God, and I can't give God anything. I just received, my friends. A sheep can't do anything for the shepherd. Come on. So if you hate on deconstruction, to each his own, but does it mean anything to you that I feel closer to God than ever? Because I realized true love wasn't ours for God, but his for us. Are you happy that perfect love really drove out my fear? Are you saying amen because I'm free indeed because of the Son? Are you happy that I'm really living out Romans 8:1? Like, for real this time, not under condemnation, and this is my starting point now and how I view my relationship with God? Well, I hope so. I can tell you, I really believe God is leading me on this journey, and that's not a disqualifier for your journey if it doesn't look the same. And speaking of journeys, today you'll be hearing from two familiar voices, co-host Jed Payne and one of our longest running guests and commentators, Jack Hoy, the father addition. These guys have been on a journey of divorce. I've never been on that one, but there's still a lot to learn and apply in my marriage by what I hear in their stories of divorce, and I really appreciate them talking so openly about it. Jed Payne and Jack Hoy, folks, all about their divorces.
I'm happy. I've got a good life. But I also have this sense of loss, and this may seem smaller, but it's actually very significant to me. Like, my grandchildren will never come to the home that their parents grew up in. My children can never return to the home that they grew up in because that home doesn't exist anymore. So, like, that's kind of an enduring sadness for me.
Yeah.
See, that's not fair. I thought it was yes or no, and it makes me seem cold and callous. Unfair, Jack. Unfair.
Okay,
Well, you
I
should
apologize.
I
will comply from here on out.
Jed, you should know the rules by now that guests just do whatever the hell they
My
want to do.
official answer I
here.
want to say is different. I want to say my life is
Yeah.
different.
Me being on the other side, and I happen to be in a very difficult season of marriage, there would be some aspect that would be easier, but I think it would be more of a lazy thing because it's like, okay, I don't have to work on this anymore.
Less
So maybe like
inconvenient.
does your former spouse hold and let's just go ahead and name your spouses. I know we have Jack's Penny, and then Jed, what was your wife's name?
I don't know if I want to name her.
Okay, you got it. So does your former spouse hold a special place in your heart, Jed?
Yes.
These are...
Yeah.
What if you said no and she listened? That'd be bad, right?
I doubt she would listen, but
How about you?
See, I would say no. I mean, at the same time, what I would say is I still feel responsibility there. And the reason I say that is that if she was to struggle, that would put pressure on my children. And I don't want them to have to carry that pressure. So, but not emotionally, I would say that there's not a special place anymore.
Given that your marriage no longer exists, when you think back on all the years together, child raising and all of that, is it a feeling of like sentimentality? Like,
Well, I mean, again, I like that was my life. We were
Yeah.
married 35 years. And like it doesn't taint every memory.
yeah.
No.
Entertain me on this one. A little quirky theology. Jed, if you aren't remarried, which you aren't right now, you do have a girlfriend, but there's no cheating involved with anything. Nobody's doing anything in secret. Is it full-blown adultery if you sleep with your ex-wife right now?
I have a girlfriend, so it's cheating.
Yeah, but you just have to ask your girlfriend, and if she said yes, that's what I'm saying. Is there's
That is never gonna happen.
It's weird. I was dating this woman for a while, and she asked me about that. I'm not like, what are you talking about? And everything was like, that's actually a thing that, it's a very common thing for exes to sleep together because it's comfortable
Sure.
and, whatever.
yeah,
But I think it's really something wrong with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know more about Jack's story than I do Jed's, but you guys give a snapshot on the marriage that you had. In your opinion, what happened? Who wants to go first? And Jed, how long were you married?
We were married for 4 or 5, together for 8.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Jack was
Gotcha.
married as long as I have been alive. So that's
So, like, I have kind of like two ways to frame this. And I want to be careful to, like, I don't want to say anything that wouldn't be honoring to Penny. I avoid that at all times, and including in my thoughts. I just don't, I don't blame her for the divorce. I just feeling as after that long, it's like, it's got to be very close to 50-50, right? So I would just say two things. One of them is we were just very, very different. We had an extremely short courtship. So Myers-Briggs, if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, we are different on each of the dimensions.
Gosh, not one common.
No, and in fact, we're fairly extreme on each of the dimensions, each of us. And so, it's like differences are interesting and intriguing, but you got to have some common ground too. And that was really where we struggled. We just never had a lot of common ground, really, other than our faith.
So the connection was physical attraction and y'all liked each other's personalities.
Yeah, well, right. She was just like so appealing, and I think you always look at somebody with differences, and in some unconscious way, you think that supplies a lack that I have. But like you said, common ground is necessary too. And that was where we always just struggled. So we always had a challenging marriage. Penny had she had a rare form of leukemia, developed when she was about 40, and had a bone marrow transplant, had several years really like between life and death. And I remember when her goal in life was to live long enough to see our younger son graduate from high school. And so she ended up having like a better life than we ever imagined. But something that my daughter said to me shortly after the divorce, so Penny had her bone marrow transplant at a place in Seattle, which was kind of like, based on her research, the place to go. And she said, so we had some long talks after the kids learned about the divorce, and she says, we should have probably all had counseling when Mom came back from Seattle. She said, because we were so focused on trying to make sure that everything was fine, and it was fine. And we never thought about what it was like for her to sit in that chair all day and just watch and not participate. Because Penny was just kind of immobilized in this chair most of the time during the day. And I just thought that was a really insightful comment, because I think once she began to regain her health, then it was like I felt she was on this search for something meaningful to center her life on. And
that journey was how long, Jack? From finding out about the cancer to
beginning to regain health?
Yeah.
Probably 5 years.
Gotcha. Good golly, 5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I just think that was part of it for her. She ended up concluding, hey, I want to do something different. So anyway, that's my take.
So it was like she didn't I get this second lease on life, and it's now I have a new perspective.
And what do I want to do with
it?
Wow. And obviously I'm not needed over here.
Wow.
I know you don't want to come right out and say this, but I want to remind you that you did say 50-50. So you've already acknowledged that. So with this question, ultimately, though, when it came to that decision, you didn't really have a decision to make. It was already made.
Right. Well, what I would say is that she decided to end the marriage, but she wasn't responsible for the failure of the marriage.
Beautiful.
That's an interesting thing too. So when I work with, and this is obviously not a direct comparison, but I see the comparison. It's kind of interesting. I work with when I work with family sessions. I'm an addictions counselor, and I do family sessions with people in addiction. And so if say the husband has been very sick, alcoholic for 10 years, and so the wife has been in caretaker mode that entire time. Suddenly, the husband gets well, and the family dynamic has been so focused on the husband being sick, the wife being the one healthy, that when the husband gets healthy, nobody knows what to do anymore, because everybody's family role is completely cattywampus, and the wife gets resentful that the husband doesn't need her as much anymore. And that's obviously, I hope that didn't come across as disrespectful in any way, but I can see sort of the parallels with that. That's very interesting. So mine is definitely different. And so this is all kind of retroactive. And me and my wife, we met when we were a few months sober, and then we ended up relapsing together. We used together for about a year, and then we went to treatment together. In 2014, we went to the last treatment center together, and so we finally sobered up. We ended up breaking up initially. Then one of the counselors there was like a marriage and family therapist, so she kind of coached us through a relationship and basically said, like, if you want this, because they always say that relationships born in addiction are just not going to work. It's just something that typically does not work. So she was like, if y'all want this to work, you're going to have to really work at it and do it the right way. So, for the first year of our sobriety, we lived apart from each other. We lived in sober livings. We each did our own recovery. This was also the point, like in 2014 is when I started again. That's when I found Bad Christian and stuff. That's when I started again really taking my faith really seriously again. And
Wait, back up. So Bad Christian did that for you.
It was a huge...
You're welcome.
Yeah, dude.
You're welcome for your faith and all of that. You're welcome.
It played a huge role.
God would not have known what to do to get through to you without Bad Christian.
I'm dead serious.
You, That honestly, those things do. I mean, they can't help but to make me feel good that you benefited from that in your season. And I keep interrupting.
No,
you, Jed.
it's fine. I mean, it literally. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to get into podcasting. I really would say it changed the course of my life in a significant way. So, but that was all because of Matt and Toby. You had very little to do with that.
You sick bastard.
Yeah. So,
no, that was good.
I had strong convictions about like premarital sex and things like that. And my idea of God back then was like, God's not going to bless sinful relationships and stuff. And so in my mind, I wasn't committing premarital sex because I planned on marrying this girl. Okay. And so we didn't cohabitate. I wasn't loophole. Because that's how God works. He's like, he figured it out. So we didn't cohabitate until we got married. Well, actually, it was a few months before we got married because my house got flooded, so I kind of had to.
Wait, did you kiss dating goodbye? Did you guys kiss dating
What
goodbye?
is that? I don't know that reference. Is that?
You've never heard that book? I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Oh my gosh,
I'll
Jed.
check it out.
You've been sheltered from evangelicalism. I didn't think you were.
Funny. So we got married at our second year of sobriety. So I say all that to say we probably did not really know who we were going to turn out to be. That's what I realize now. In my mind, we got married on three kind of things that were certain, that we had like a healthy, intimate life. We were both going to be sober.
Tell us about that. Let's get into some details.
I'm not going to. That's the PG version, that we were both healthily intimate, and that part was really, really good. That we were both going to be sober, and that we were both Christians. And I was a super social person. She was friends with all of my friends. And so it's kind of the opposite of Jack. We had a conglomeration of similar interests. Like our interests lined up completely. And I had a friend tell me that oftentimes you can confuse similar interests with like compatibility and intimacy and love. And I think that's kind of what happened for a lot of it. We were very, very similar. We were very easy to live with each other. And I thought things were going really well. In my head, I thought things were going really well. 3 years into it, I think it was 3 years.
Hey, Jed, were you guys connecting at an emotional level, talking about deeper heart things during the time that you think it was going well?
I thought we were. Through the lens now, I don't think we were as much. I think I also overlooked a lot of things because of intimacy compatibility. That's something else I've kind of learned about myself, is that I was, when that is going well, sometimes you overlook other things that might not be going so well. So 3 years into it, I woke up in bed and I found a weed pipe in bed. I rolled over and I found a weed pipe. And I was like, what is this? What is this? And it turned out that she had been smoking weed for about 6 months that I had no idea about. So that was a massive. It was equivalent to being cheated on. It was just a massive deception, especially given what our relationship was established on. It wasn't really a conversation from her being like, is it okay if I do this? It was kind of just like, I want to do this. And so either you're okay with it or not. And so I had this huge crisis. And once again, I'm trying to be the godly husband. And it's like, well, if my wife had cancer, would I leave her if she got sick? If these are really the thoughts I had, because it's like, okay, you need to just be an accommodating husband. And so I kind of allowed it. And we tried to set some ground rules, like, you'll only do it at night. And she said it was for like self-medicating, basically. 5 months later, I found a bottle of liquor under the bathroom counter, and I was like, okay, well, what is this? Because my whole big thing was, I was like, look, I need you to be honest. That's the thing. Like the bigger issue is that you lied to me.
Is it safe to say this is kind of a bigger deal for people in recovery also?
Yes.
I mean, you guys
a lot of people,
recovery.
Yes, and especially, and I guess even more so for me, I am a very hard case addict. And so for things like that, in retrospect, it was so dangerous. I mean, it really changed my outlook on a lot of things. And I work with addicts, so I work at a treatment center, and she was kind of like, well, you're just treating me like one of your clients. Like, I don't necessarily even think that I'm an addict. I can control it. And so I was like, well, okay, maybe you can. Who am I to know? But that is where our paths kind of started diverging. It kind of started the next 2 years of me basically whistling in the dark, convincing myself that I was okay with this thing when I really wasn't. And I was just going through mental gymnastics to think that I was. And she stopped going to church with me. And then it came out that she's not really a Christian. And that was kind of not really true. She revealed to me that she literally hated hearing the word Jesus, to that degree, because she had some church trauma. And it was just some things that my standards, I guess, for myself are I'm responsible, like Jack said, I'm responsible for my own happiness. I'm also responsible for my own issues. And, I can't stay a victim. It's if I have an issue, I'm kind of responsible for working on it, and the world is not responsible for my issues. So I go to therapy. I worked with a sponsor. I was doing all these proactive things, and I saw her basically only turning to weed and alcohol and isolation to, quote, fix her problems, which the intimacy started slipping away drastically, and it was kind of revealed that she had some issues with that as well. And so it was just the three tenets or three foundations of our union were kind of revealed to have been not true, and the way she said it were never true, that she was just trying to convince herself. And it kind of came to a head where I started just getting extremely resentful. I was starting to get tempted. It became way more brazen. She was keeping beer in the fridge, weed stuff all over the house. How I coped with it was I started gambling again, and I started going to the casino. And this is coinciding too with going off of medications and things, and some other things happen. You can listen to my podcast where I talk about it, where I go to a trauma treatment center. But basically, it was December of last year. We had one when she found out about my gambling. We had a massive fight, and I basically screamed all of the resentments that I'd been building up for 2 years, and said some things you can't really take back. And in December, I decided to kill myself because I just felt trapped in this situation. And so I ended up in this trauma treatment center in Kentucky, and it was kind of there. I thought I was going there for my own mental health, but kind of what I found out while I was there was that I was not as happy with my marriage as I thought I was. And so while I was there, I was kind of telling her, that's when I said, you're kind of going to have to figure out if you want to be with me or smoke weed. And May, when I got back, she ended up asking me for a divorce.
Dude, I did not know some of that. Dang,
Yeah.
man. That's heavy. That's heavy. Do y'all think it's ironic that we don't try to hit up people who have gone through a divorce for marital input and advice? It's always we have to gravitate towards the marriages that look awesome, and it's well, I bet you people who have got a divorce have some. Jack has said things about his marriage and divorce that has been eye-opening for me and my marriage from a advice standpoint.
On that, and I shamefully admit too, I was such in this illusion of and we had said up front that divorce just isn't an option, that we're in this, and that's part of what played into just feeling like I wasn't going to get out of it. But I would judge people that got divorces. We had a couple friends that got married around the same time, and their marriages didn't work, and it was kind of well, luckily that's not us, in a very judging way. And it's ugh.
Jed, this sounds like it'll be a difficult task for you, given your story. Jack, you threw out 50% your contributions. What would some of those be?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'll share one thing that was a real eye opener for me, because what it kind of framed again is we're so different. So some years ago, when I was starting my consulting practice, I went for a week and got trained on the disc profile. And actually, there are a lot of different disc tests. And so we took them all because we're trying to learn how to use them and understand how they work. And anyway, one of them was on like your listening styles. And it had these 5 different, you were scored on these 5 different areas. Like one was evaluative listening, listening for the purpose of making a decision. Well, I was high on that, right? I'm an analyst. Empathic listening. One was comprehensive listening, appreciative listening, which really talks about your capacity to sit still and enjoy it when someone is trying to entertain you.
Entertain?
Yes. And my score was 0.
0.
And what went through my mind when I was looking at that and thinking about it was, so again, going back to Myers-Briggs, I have a Myers-Briggs book that has like a 1-word label for each of the types. And what came to my mind was the 1-word label for Penny's type is the entertainer.
Mm.
And it just what it made me think was, okay, so there must have been hundreds of times when she comes in all full of whatever, and I just, my utter lack of responsiveness just would have squelched her, and without me realizing it, without trying to say, I'm going to deliberately not enjoy what you're doing, just not, again, it was just such an eye-opener for me. And that was like 30 years in. So that's, I guess, what I think about is it's that kind of thing.
A year from now, I come to you, you and I have lunch every now and then, and we're at lunch, and I say, Jack, man, I feel the same exact way, like what you described in your relationship with Penny. Oh my gosh, now I realize that's me and Priscilla. What do you think I should do?
Well, it's funny. I actually had a friend come to me, a guy, not a close friend, but a guy I've served with on a ministry board for a number of years. And he reached out to me 6-7 months ago. And basically like hey, my marriage is in real trouble. I'm thinking about ending it. I know you've been through this. So we've actually stayed in touch. We talk regularly. And, my thing, is, in fact, he started off with are you happier now? And I said, I kind of gave that's a loaded question. But one of the things one of the things that what we talked about at one point was, is there anything left undone? And I felt like there were some things that I wish we had the ability to do to try to see if we could make it work. And my thing with him was, don't leave anything undone that can be done. That's all.
Yeah, I agree to that completely. What I felt was a blossoming problem is I called it seeking help from 2 different sources, where it's like I kind of do understand now the importance of at least being somewhat spiritually aligned in the same direction, because I don't know for sure, but from my perspective, I do not think we were like praying to the same person for the same resolutions, or even looking at the relationship and what we want for the other person and what we can tolerate from the same philosophical, spiritual dude. Like I searched out mixed faith marriages books. I mean, I was like, which a good one I'll recommend. It's called Blessed Are the Nuns. If anyone's going through that, like Nones, that's probably the best book I've read on the subject.
Did you read the book Husbands, What to Do When You're an Asshole? Have you read that one? I'll send you a link. When you reflect on your marriage, what contributions did you make?
Sure.
Like, what was your fault?
My elevation of sex probably played a role in it, because it was, and this kind of goes into the purity culture talk, which I think we did a while back, where it's like, I was raised to believe that all sex except for sex within the confines of marriage is sinful. And so I went through a life of having guilt-ridden sex, and here I go, God, I'm playing by your rules, and now I have a wife that doesn't even want to have sex with me. It was infuriating, to be honest. And then I would feel bad about myself and feel like a pig, or that all I care about was sex. But, scientifically speaking, it's pretty important for companionship. It's obviously not the most important thing, and I wish that wasn't the case, but that for sure played a role. Things that she has told me that I can see too is I was a very social person. I'm always with friends. I tried my best to include her in that, but came out with she didn't really like my friend group, so I think she felt like I prioritized my friends over her, which is probably true. And as much as I can say that she critique the things that I did or the things that I was into, she could say the same for her, because there was just this resentment fostering. And once I saw that weed and things were in the picture, I wanted to blame I looked at every one of her behaviors through that lens. So if like the floor was dirty, it was because she smoked weed. If the dishes weren't done, it was because she smoked weed. If that can't possibly be true, right? So that's a distortion on my end. But it was these things were like automatic.
You left the milk out. You were high and forgot. Like, yeah, you can go any direction.
Yeah.
With
So definitely probably for me, some ego. I can be very selfish. Oh, and then also, and you know this too, Joey, when I I did the on and off medication dance for a couple years, and that can be like, I get it, dude. I probably was not a peach to live with for quite a bit amount of time. Like that's pretty rough to kind of deal with someone that is so unsteady from 1 month to the next, mental health wise.
Yeah. Whosoever shall put away his wife. Finish using the remote control. I'm going to put it away. Finish with my wife. Going to put her away. Except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. If you're not familiar with traditional theology in the Christian church, if you divorce, that's first and foremost a sin, and it's like you always have that. You remarry, well, you're still divorced, and so you're causing your new wife to have adultery. And does this passage apply to you guys? What say you guys? If I'm a fundamental, Bible-beaten, fire and brimstone pastor, and I say, God hates divorce, you have unrepentant sin, you guys just ignored that verse, right? I mean, y'all are like, yeah, I don't really care what God has to say.
I am covered by God, because if the unbelieving wife wants to leave, you're supposed to let her go. But so that was the joke answer, but it really was, and honestly, my dad told me that as a way to comfort me. I don't know if I could have even left, partly because of my codependency, partly because the pain. I am such a jealous person. The pain of imagining my ex-wife with another man is, I would rather stay in the pain of a shitty marriage than deal with that pain. And I think I punted that, and I think I may have done that forever. So I believe God's hand may have been in that. I don't know.
Like, are you relieved y'all didn't have kids?
Yes.
Like, is that okay, yeah. I think I'm reading between the lines that you guys have not reconciled any sort of friendship or anything like that at this point.
It's cordial whenever we do text.
Yeah.
I just feel like part of the deal with the way that we as Christians are supposed to process Old Testament teachings, there's like, what is the spirit here? What's the issue that's at hand is part of it. And that doesn't mean you ignore what it says, but I'll get to that in a second. Whoever shall put away his wife. Okay, so this is a culture where the man had the power to do that. The wife really didn't. Put his wife except for fornication and marry another. In other words, I'm really tired of you. This looks like a better deal over here. I'm going to put you away so I can go get that. Yeah, that's wrong. That's abusive. That's adultery. Is that an absolute prohibition to any Christian remarrying where there wasn't an issue of adultery? I mean, it's a fair question, and I can't say I know the answer to that definitively. But I guess the way I frame the issue is in the larger question of, like, what's the purpose of marriage? The church has become less negative about divorce than it used to be. And I think in one sense that's sad, not because we're not enforcing a rule, because I don't think that the rule is the issue at all. And I think the issue is that what we're reinforcing is the culture's view that the purpose of marriage is self-fulfillment. There's part of that that's the purpose of the marriage, but I think the purpose of marriage is a lot broader. And, one of the things that remarrying does is it affects the family. And I just feel like one of the major purposes of marriage, argue probably the major purpose of marriage, is the family. It's not what those two people get out of it entirely. It has to work between those two people, but that's not all there is. And if I was to remarry at this point, would that have an effect on my family? I think it would. And I would handle that really cautiously. If my children were all opposed to, if I wanted to marry somebody and my children were all opposed to it, it's always risky to say I wouldn't do it. But I mean, I really don't think I would. That's important to me. And it's like it's a prior commitment, I'm their dad and that will never change. And what other future commitments I take on have to be taken on in light of that one.
Yeah. And I always have, and I really haven't gotten a satisfying answer, but when everyone talks about modern Western marriage versus Old Testament Near East marriage, like, we're not talking about the same thing, right? It's the old right. Adam and Eve, where's their marriage certificate? And it's like, okay, so what are we, and I've always heard that marriage is the example or the representation of Christ in the church, right? We've all heard that. So what definition of marriage is what's important to God? Like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about North American 2022 justice of the peace marriage? Can we define some terms here? I also do, I had a very good modeling of marriage with my parents, and they've been married for, 30 something years, something like that, maybe 40, I don't know, a long time. So I have a high respect for marriage. I do believe in it, and I think it's a good thing. Yeah, things happen, I guess.
This was extremely insightful for me. So I was in church fellowship with, if you're from India, you can say Indian, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So, and
no, Native American.
I don't know these days. So he is Indian, and his family pretty much converted to evangelicalism, but they still had some of their traditions. And so, Shajo and I are buddies. And so I was hearing about this as it was happening. So basically it was kind of arranged, but it wasn't forced. So what they would do in their family, parents would say, hey, we have a family that we think that you would really like their daughter. Can you guys go out and just give it a whirl? Both of them know what they're doing. We're kind of testing the waters here. Once he found his match, it's not like he fell in love with her. He actually said, yeah, I think I'm kind of excited about this. This can actually work. And then she feels the same way. Like, they make a decision. Hey, I think this would be functional. I think this would be a good partnership. I did ask them. Now they love each other. And they have kids. They have a good marriage. How we think, I mean, we lose feelings for our spouse, and we think that's when we're supposed to get a divorce,
There was a good study that said Muslim moms are 30% more likely than their Christian counterparts to have fulfilled relationships through arranged marriages, which I thought was like a super interesting, and I'm not talking about child marriages, that sort of thing, but I thought that was very interesting.
And I think it goes to Jack's point. They're not going into it with self-centered notions. It's how can our marriage function well and for other people? Such a healthy way to go into it. Jack and I, obviously from the same church, walking through a divorce and then being part of a church community. I have no clue what yours was like, Jed, and whether or not you were met with any sort of judgment, but how did that?
The guy that plays keyboard in our praise band had gone through a divorce 3 or 4 years prior, so he really helped me through it in a great way. So there was no judgment, and it was support. Lots of support. And then I joined a small group this past year, and there was another woman who was going through a divorce from a 20-year marriage. So they've done it really well. Lots of support.
Jack, how about you with our Seacoast leadership?
Yeah, very much so.
And at the time you were employed at Seacoast.
Yeah. And so I immediately went and just said, look, if this is an issue, don't hesitate to say so. But like one of the things that I wanted to do was to get counseling and just make sure I'm processing what I need to and addressing things that I need to and seeing myself as I need to see myself. Yeah, no, it was nothing but support within the church.
I really think it's something to slow down and pay attention to. Well, I'll say a family member just 15 years ago asked me, do I think she's going to be okay because she's divorced and remarried? And this is someone my mom's age asking me that. So the climate 15 years ago, obviously every church is different, but you go back 30 years ago and it's like divorce is oh my gosh, that's like one of the worst things you could possibly do. It's funny. It feels like, imagine if the church took a hard stance against divorce right now, how many divorced people would not feel welcomed. I don't think Jesus came down at any point in time and said, hey, loosen up on divorce. It seems like a cultural shift. There was something that we once held in such low regard. If you get a divorce, you're probably going to have to be removed from ministry, removed from, it's a heavy, bad, big deal. And I don't think it's like that anymore.
Like, to me, there's kind of two very different things involved in that. One of them is, what's the stereotype of culture in 1950s America? It wasn't just that the church was opposed to divorce. It was like there were a lot of cultural norms that were, by our terms today, extremely strict. And so the church was involved in setting those to some extent, but also responding to them. So now you have a very different culture. And, I like to me, the essence of Christianity is like, love God with all your heart and do what you want. And now that's not a license it's like are you serious about loving God with all your heart? Well, we live in a fallen world though. There are going to be hard choices to be made. There are going to be times when you face two bad options and you got to pick one. And that's just the way life is. And so it isn't helpful for any of us to judge each other, and that's not our role. Our role is to support and encourage each other and point each other to the truth with love.
Jed, this is an interesting thing. Jack, unbeknownst to him at the time, and maybe to his chagrin, when I heard that Jack even wavered on inerrancy, and I'm like, wait a second, this guy is embraced by Seacoast, evangelical church. I mean, he's like the COO. And did I just hear that inerrancy and how we view it just doesn't work? And so that's that. I would say that was kind of the official beginning of my deconstruction.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
But I'm still a Christian, so you don't have anything to feel bad about.
I was going to say, I just like reading in Ezekiel today about the thing about the watchman. Like, if you don't tell this guy what I asked you to tell him, his blood is on your head. And now I'm just thinking God's going to say that Joey's
Oh, yeah,
blood is
you're
on
going to, the millstone's getting tied around your ankle as we speak, Jack.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I kind of go with Jack, too. It's like, okay, so less divorces in the 50s, but how many wives were absolutely getting the brakes beaten off of them when they, you know what I'm saying?
You guys are.
It's like it was probably more similar to the Near Eastern view of marriage, where like, I don't remember the last time in history when it was like women couldn't even go some places without their husband, but divorcing your wife back then, it was much more it had much more cultural, societal consequences than it does today. The phrase I hate the most in our modern culture is just like, do whatever makes you happy and screw everyone. It's just like, that is the most singular toxic mindset you can have. It's like, that is not the way to live, right? Because it's just, your truth is your truth. It's like, that doesn't really work. In my line of work, I see a lot of consequences of divorce, and I think a lot of people may like to think that it doesn't have rippling effects outside of the husband and wife, but if there's children and then the step parents, this is anecdotal. In my little experience, I see the consequences of this kind of mindset of, you no longer are satisfying me in the way that I want, therefore I'm out and I'm going somewhere else. I don't think that's the right extreme either. I guess I'm just big on commitment should mean, and like Jack said, it's like, try every single thing you like, exhaust. Divorce should be the last option, and I'm not talking about abuse. We're assuming that all that's off the table for this conversation. But if it's just a matter of like you're starting to resent each other and stuff, like exhaust all options. Like it is a commitment. I think being in a relationship with anyone holds up a mirror to yourself, and and that's kind of what I see, maybe some divine purpose in marriage. The same with having kids is it's kind of a built-in preventer of selfishness gone wild. It's like you are kind of forced into a position where you have to reduce yourself and elevate someone else. You can't always do the things you want to do, and some of those things might be damaging. So it's like if you weren't in these situations, who knows where you would be. I'm a much better person, me personally, when I'm in a committed relationship than I am dating and just moving from person to person to person. That, to me, that doesn't sit well with my soul and morals and stuff.
Jed, I asked you to marinate on God's word before coming, and I also asked you to seek God for a download. And so hopefully you did that. I'm going to ask you to share with our listeners, what would you say to them, divorced or married? You say whatever you want to say. But if I'm twisting your arm here and I'm saying, Jed, offer these people some advice. You did marinate on God's word,
right? This is the word he gave me. Better for a man to live on the corner of the roof than in a house with a quarrelsome wife.
That's the scripture
Absolutely.
He pointed you to?
And I was like,
that was the download?
Lord, you are absolutely right. So I moved my bed to the roof. Things have been good.
You've actually been married. You've been divorced.
I can sum it up with one word, and that word is communication. Because in my own experience, on both of our parts, not communicating things that we were thinking created a downfall. Pretending things were better than we were secretly thinking. Basically just not communicating, or not communicating well, or communicating,
or not knowing what to communicate.
Sure. Your spouse and any person in general has zero responsibility for making you feel any sort of way. They can't make you happy. They can't make you sad. They can't make you mad. They can only do things, and you can respond to those things or react to those things, right? It's all choice. Having a healthy self-awareness, taking responsibility for your own things, communicating to each other. What are we committing to? There are some things that doesn't matter. Like if they like The Bachelor and I like Star Wars, like that is whatever. You don't have to be perfectly compatible. But in my experience, there are going to be certain core values that if you are not in alignment with, then you're going to have trouble, and it's going to be an upward battle. And for divorced people, I think I would just say, learn from your mistakes. And even in my current relationship, I've come into situations where I had a flashback to where, this happened in my marriage, and that was how I reacted back then, and it did not work. So I need to react differently this time. And sometimes it goes antithetical to what I want to react. Don't look to someone else. It's not fair to someone else if you're looking to them to fill that hole.
Pretty unfair position to put them in, for sure.
If you're married, don't give up. Don't leave anything undone that can be done. Doesn't mean that every marriage is going to make it, but don't walk away and then wonder later, would we have made it if? I read there was a really large scale study done in a university setting. It was this woman who was a professor of psychology, and so they did this large scale study over a number of years. The essence of the study was they surveyed, I can't remember how many hundreds of couples, asked them to rate their marriage. I think the scale was like 1 to 7, 7 being the best, 1 being, and then they revisited the same couples X years later and kind of went through this process, and bottom line, asked them to measure their marriage again. Something like 2/3 of the couples who rated their marriage a 1 or a 2 and were still together rated their marriage at that point a 6 or a 7. Wow. The kind of her takeaway was, every marriage goes through rough patches. But for those who make it through, who work through that, most of the time, there will be joy at the other end. And I think part of the joy is you become a better person by working through. It's not just your spouse fixes things. You fix things in yourself too, because you have to if you're going to work through the challenges that you face together. And so there's that opportunity. Now, at the same time, 2/3 is not everybody. And what about the couples who didn't stay together? Could some of them have made it? Yes. Maybe some of them never could have, and they were wise to do what they did. So that's I don't say that in a spirit of judgment. I just say, don't give up. Like, so I've dated some women who are divorced. This one woman, she had been through a divorce 30 years ago, and the guy treated her very badly. No question. She's still bitter, though. Like, don't carry bitterness.
That's great.
You're just poisoning yourself. And if you have children, realize that when you carry bitterness against your ex-spouse, you're basically putting your children in a position where they have to choose between you. And that's wrong. Everybody needs a good relationship with both their mother and their father, regardless of who their mother and their father is. And you shouldn't do anything to make that more difficult for them.
I Googled to confirm this, Jed, that there's like 25 prerequisites of, it's an official document, prerequisites of being an evangelical. And one of them is you have to be aware of I Kiss Dating Goodbye books. So if you ever wondered whether or not you're an evangelical, you're not. If you don't know about I Kiss Dating Goodbye, sorry, Jed, if you thought you were an evangelical. I mean, you could almost be not a Christian if you've never heard of I Kiss Dating Goodbye. Google it for real, though. You'll be like, how did I miss out on this?
I will.
Jed, thanks, man.
Yes. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank
Good
you.
being with you.